following on from this morning, really, where we looked at a better sacrifice that's spoken of in the book of Hebrews. Do you know you can read the book of Hebrews in under an hour? You can go right through it. Now I read speaking. I don't read with my eyes, I speak, but I do read with my eyes. That's a bit without others, isn't it? But I can't scan, I've got to read, and so I read out loud. And don't forget, they're letters that were meant to be read out loud as well. And so you take that a little bit longer if you've got to read through and talk the words out, but you can do it just over an hour, the whole book of Hebrews. And it's surprising what you can pick up as you go through, and it gives a good sense of the flow of the book if you're able to pick it up and go through, and then perhaps on a day-to-day thing for a little while you could have a little study of the book of Hebrews. Don't be frightened of it. It's a book that can help us along our way. Tonight we're looking at not a better sacrifice, but a better way. And again, it's one of those situations where if you read a chapter a day, Nicodemus just appears from nowhere. He's not mentioned before, and he just appears from nowhere. It almost seems as if he's been stuck on there. In chapter 3, you don't know who he is, where he's from. But when you go into chapter 2, and you come to the end of chapter 2, you have a little idea of at least what he's been up to. Verses 23 to 25 of chapter 2 says this in John's Gospel. Now when Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover, during the feast many believed in his name, when they saw the signs which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself to them, because he knew all men, and had no need that anyone should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. It's a strange thing, this. Jesus did not commit himself to them. Now, that word commit means he did not place his trust in them. It's the same word as the word trust. He did not trust them. Now that's a strange thing to say, because we have that phrase, don't we? If you draw near to God, he will draw near to you. We have a similar episode in chapter 6, when he feeds the at least 5,000 men, besides women and children, with those loaves and fishes. And it says that the people, because they saw what he did, they wanted to make him king. But it says Jesus departed from them, because he knew that their faith was a superficial faith, a surface faith. Their faith was based on what they saw, not what they heard. It's very interesting, that, isn't it? Remember, your faith comes by not seeing, but hearing the word of God. Jesus turned to Thomas on one occasion, when Thomas came back with that wonderful rendition of how he understood Christ to be, my Lord and my God, he said. And Thomas was told then by the Lord, he said, Thomas, blessed are you because you believe. But listen now, there's coming a day when there will be people who will not see, and yet they will believe. And so Jesus cannot commit himself to a superficial faith. The streets were full, the court of the temple would have been full. It would have been a wonderful time of sharing blessings and all the different things that were going on at that Paschal feast. But we find that Jesus did not commit himself to them. Look at the verse there. When they saw the signs which he did, many believed in his name. That would be a wonderful thing to have, wouldn't it? And yet, it says there, Jesus knew all. He could see beneath the veneer. It wasn't just the case, remember that time when it used to be on the TV, at the right time, on the right channel. And there was something else said as well, I can't remember what it was now. But so very often, we fit in to what's demanded of us But Jesus is looking for something deeper. And he cannot commit himself to something that is superficial. Now, among that crowd there in Jerusalem at the Paschal feast, one man is singled out. That doesn't mean that he was the only one that was interested in what Jesus taught. But John picks him out. And he said there was a man, a Pharisee, a ruler of the Jews, whose name was Nicodemus. And that's where Nicodemus fits in. From that day, he considered what Jesus had done and what Jesus had said. And he wanted to know more. He wanted to know more. What was the secret that Jesus had? Why is it that he could be like he was? How is it that he could do what he could do? And how is it that he was able to speak in such a manner? This is a man that would have been acquainted with, he actually comes across it in chapter 7. He would have been acquainted with the way that the Pharisees understood Jesus. And he would have heard them speak in harsh tones concerning him. And when they sent out someone to trap him in his words, they came back and said, "We've never heard a man speak like this man before." Do you know, he could speak to a child, and the child would be almost eating out of his hand. He could speak to a young teenager, and the teenager would be drawn to him. He could speak to a man, to a woman, in full adulthood. He could speak to the oldest in the land, and his words were so plain, so clear, so simple, so that you could understand exactly what he was saying. We've never heard a man speak like this man. Nicodemus wanted to know more. He wanted to dig just a little bit deeper. He didn't want superficiality. He wanted to know what Jesus had. And so we find the threefold description of him. He's a Pharisee, he's a ruler of the Jews, and he is a master or a rabbi in Israel. A Pharisee. The word Pharisee means he was a separated one. He would have held himself aloof from what we would call the laity, the common people. It would be bred within him as a Pharisee that he would not be found among such. We spoke last week, I think, of the different, what was it, the tax collector. We spoke of Zacchaeus. And if a tax collector, if he but brushed the side of a Pharisee, the Pharisee felt defiled. He would have held himself aloof from common people, from the laity, from people like you and us. He was a ruler of the Jews. He was a member of the Sanhedrin Council, the ruling Jewish council. 70, 71 or 72 men. Choose what you like. Doesn't really matter. It's not going to decide whether or not you're a Christian or not, how many men were there. But he was a man of great influence. To be on the Sanhedrin, a man was normally middle-aged. He was in his prime. He would have been wealthy. He would have been well-educated. Joseph have had a stack of exams, and no doubt Naomi's had a few exams as well this summer. This man would have been well-read. He would have been multilingual. He would not have only spoken Aramaic or Hebrew. He would have been multilingual. You remember when Rabshakeh came from Assyria and attacked Jerusalem, and they spoke in plain Hebrew to the people that were stood on the walls of Jerusalem. And the counselors of the king turned and said, "Don't speak to us in our language, speak in your own language. We can understand you." There were a people that were well educated. They would have been multilingual. They would have been well learned in the sciences, in medicines, and in mathematics. Why would he want to be well read in mathematics? There we are. Don't tell a mathematician if I just said that now. They would have been aware of astrology and of the cults because they would have found it necessary to have answered questions when questioning people that were involved in these things. He would have been very, very wealthy. Finally, he was called a master. In your authorized version, in the Old King James, it would say a master. It's the New King James that have got it right. The master. He was ranked as one of the finest teachers in Israel at that time. You remember Paul's teacher, Gamaliel, a man of great influence. They would have lived at the same time. Imagine having two masters like that in a city. They talk of Spurgeon, and they talk of that other brother that was preaching in London at that time. They talk of Daniel Rowlands and the brother that came from Brecon. They talk of Wesley and they talk of Whitfield. Strange how God raises up people like that in twos and threes and fours in a location that is quite concentrated together. Nicodemus was a master or the master teacher in all of Israel. He would have been well learned in the Old Testament. He would have been known as a rabbi, a teacher. And so this man comes, and we find that like Saul of Tarsus in days later, Saul of Tarsus coming from a similar background, having similar qualifications, Saul found that he had to lay all these qualifications aside. He had to put them down that he might know Christ. That's not an excuse for a youngster not to study for their exams. It is not an excuse for us to lay back and forget about the world and what's going on in the world. That's not an excuse for that. But what Paul says, when it comes to knowing Christ, the most important thing is this, to know him. And if any of those qualifications that you've got, when I say qualifications, anything of your background that gets in the way, anything that is in the makeup of you that stops you from coming to Christ, put it aside. Put it aside. Well, we find with this man, he comes. He comes, it seems, constantly, hesitantly. He's hesitant in nature. He's not decisive. I remember being in an interview once, and I said this, well, I didn't get the job. I think I am decisive. You're either decisive or you're not. You can't think you are. He's hesitant in his nature. We see it here, and we see it in chapter 7, and we see it in chapter 20. We see him hesitant. He's fearful. He's conscious of his surroundings. He comes to Jesus by night. He has a lot to lose, see. He's got a lot to lose. Moses had a lot to lose. But he considered the reproach, the riches of the reproach of Christ, far greater riches than the pleasures of sin for a season. There are times when things are more important than self-esteem, more important than your public esteem. There is something that is far, far richer and deeper. If you should gain the whole world and lose your own soul, when you put things in front, you'll lose out on it in the end. And so we find with this man, he comes. He comes at night. I've often wondered what it must have been like. Jesus sat by himself in the shadows of the evening, and along comes this man, Nicodemus. I wondered if he recognized him from the crowd. Master, he says, Rabbi, we know. Is he speaking on behalf of others? Is it the royal we? We know that you're a teacher come from God. For no man can do the things that you've been doing except God be with you. And that's the opening statement. It's a way of introducing himself. It's a way of introducing himself. But before he can ask the question, Jesus already gives him the answer. You see, we read in chapter 2, he knows all men. Yeah. And before he can get the question out, Jesus turned and said to him, Nicodemus, you must be born again. I remember hearing of one brother that was converted and wondered how the preacher knew all about him. He was convinced that someone had told the preacher about what he'd been doing in life. But you see, God, not the preacher, God knows all about you. Yes. And so he comes and he speaks to him. You must be born again. You must be born from above. You must be born of the Spirit. In chapter 1 it says that he came into his own, and his own received him not. But to them that believed, he gave authority. He gave the assurance that they were the children of God. And they were born not of the will of man, nor of the will of the flesh, but they were born of God. What a marvelous thing. To be born of the Spirit. Now Nicodemus, being a master, being a well-educated man, he turns and says, well, how can these things be? Can a man return to his mother's womb when he's old? Jesus turns and says to him, as we go through the dialogue that they have, Jesus turns and says to him, but you must be born again. How are these things, he says. And you might be saying, well, what does it mean to be born again? Well, in the simplest terms, when you were in your mother's womb, besides being surrounded by your mother's womb, you were surrounded by this world out here. In your mother's womb, you could not contact that world. In your mother's womb, least of all, you could see this world. Least of all, you could feel this world. But when you were born and you came into this world, you made contact with it. I expect your mum and your dad could tell you many a story of the way that you contacted them in those early days. Phil and Beth are going through it now, aren't they? Where little Anna contacts them and lets them know. Granted that they necessarily don't see the world from day one. The eyes develop, and there's a point of development. But when you come into the world, you feel it, you see it, you can contact it. And what Jesus is saying is this: now, there is another world that's all around you. We're not talking about when you're in your mother's womb now. We're talking about when you're in this world. There is another world that you cannot contact, that you cannot feel, that you cannot see. Jesus says it there. You can't even see it. But when you've been born again, you can contact that world. You can feel that world. Listen to what he says. He that's born of the Spirit, he's like the wind. You don't know where he's coming. You don't know where it's come from, and you don't know where it's going. They can talk about southwesterlies and all these different things, but tell me where the wind begins and tell me where it ends. You can't tell me the point where it really starts. He said you can contact, you can feel that world. You can see that world. That's what it means to be born again. And so Nicodemus said, well, how can these things be? Can a man enter his mother's womb when he's old? What's he saying there? Is it too old to change? Jesus says, no, it's never too old. You're never too young, and you're never too old. There are people here that were saved before they were in their teens. There is individuals here that were saved before they were 10. I can take you to a man up in Vaucluse tonight who was saved when he had gone pensioner's age. That's when he got saved. You're never too early, you're never too late. And so this change. You mean that I can contact this world? Even though I've been ignorant of it all these years. Yes, you can. Do you mean I can see and understand this new world? Yes, you can. You mean I can feel the impact of this world? Yes, you can. How? By being born again. By being born anew. Jesus says to him, because he's looking at him and he can see, he's still seeking. Got that look in his eye, that puzzle. Sometimes our eyes speak louder. My dad used to say, your eyes, they speak louder than your lips are speaking. And we do that sometimes, don't we? Our eyes are saying, and he's looking at him and he says, Nicodemus, you've got to seek the truth. Now he's speaking to the master in Israel. Do you know, we can become so imbibed by our prejudices that we can't see the truth. We can be well-experienced people. This man was a master in Israel. People would go to him and say these words. What does this mean? And yet, he did not know. And he's looking, and Jesus said to him in the verses that follow, he said, find someone that can tell you the truth. There was another man, eloquent, we're told, well-versed in the scriptures. His name was Apollos. And it says concerning that husband and wife team of Priscilla and Aquila, they took him aside and showed him the more excellent way. Find someone that knows the truth. Yeah. That falls upon the Christian to be well armed, to be ready to give a reason for the hope that is within us. That's right. And so we find concerning this man, Jesus says to him, find the truth. Go back to that book you've been looking at all down through the years. That book that you're trained in, that you give answers out of. We would call it the Old Testament. Go back to that. And stop looking with prejudice now. And start to speak or seek the truth. And you'll find where the truth will lead you. We talked about it just briefly this morning. When you read the law, it points to someone who needs to be saved. It points out the way. You want to keep the commandments? Go ahead and try it. You'll fall flat on your face. You will not be able to get into heaven by fulfilling the commandments. There's 613 of them for a start. And just one failure in one commandment is enough to break the string. And so he says, keep seeking the truth. Keep seeking the truth, Nicodemus. And when you do, this is what it will show you. He said, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. It will point you to the cross. That's where it will point you. And we find, Nicodemus, he crops up in chapter 7. And he understands the rules and regulations of when someone is arrested. And on this occasion in chapter 7 of John, the rulers are deciding to try Christ in his absence. He knows the rules and regulations. The rule was that you cannot try a man in his absence. And so Nicodemus sticks his head above the parapet just for a moment, a brief moment. It's not written in our law that we can judge a man like this. He has to be present. And they turned on him. Have you ever had anybody turn on you with that venom? Have you ever had that where you just say something, you're saying something that's right, and they turn on you? And they turn on him and they crush him in a moment of time. You're just like the others. You go and find a prophet that comes out of Galilee. This man is a rebel. This man Jesus, that is. But we find in chapter 19, where it says, where the Son of Man shall be lifted up and will draw all men unto him, lo and behold, with Jesus on the cross, his life has now left him. Who comes out? First of all, it's Joseph of Arimathea, another ruler of the Jews. There's a hesitancy again, because Nicodemus comes out after him. You see that hesitancy? Doesn't mean that you become a fanatic, when you become a Christian. There are certain traits that are retained sometimes. And this hesitancy perhaps is a weakness in him. I don't know. But there he is at the foot of the cross, look. Just like Jesus said, keep seeking the truth, Nicodemus. Keep seeking the truth. No matter what your prejudice might say, what your learning might say, the truth is in there. Seek it out. And you'll find that it will bring you to a man on the cross. I saw on a hill in a faraway land. Wonderful, wonderful song that Len McGee, hanging on a tree, the form of a man with nails in his hand, crucified for me. Wonderful words. And there at the foot of the cross, conscious perhaps, but ready to serve the Master. He's ready to take him down from the cross and lay him to rest. He nailed his colours to the mast, to the cross. You must be born again. How do I do that? Keep seeking the truth, and it will bring you to the cross of Jesus. And at the cross of Jesus, you will find that answer. Where you will find that I've drawn you unto myself. Great big pull within, from deep within. And there at the cross, what will you find? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God so loved, the widest of loves, his beloved, so loved the world that he gave his beloved Son the greatest gift, that whosoever believes in him, the simplest act, should have everlasting life, the longest life. When you come to Calvary, the love of God can sweep over you. There was a man in America in the 1800s. His name was Charles Finney. Oh, he was an educated man, a qualified lawyer with a measure of success. When he was asked by his Presbyterian church as to whether or not they should pray for him, he said, I don't see the point because your prayers are never answered. He was quite straight. And so they looked at him with a measure of offense. But a day came, when he put down his prejudices and he began to seek. His handbook to study law was the Old Testament, the Law of Moses. And he would have it on his book, on his table. And he began to search through. And he became conscious that he was seeking truth. And when someone would come at the door, that book, which had been open in all other occasions, now he was seeking, he became so aware of it, and he would quickly close its book pages and tuck it away. Then a day came when light dawned upon his soul. Yes. And he gave his heart to the Lord Jesus. And he says of this, such a baptism of love came over my soul. Do you know, there was such a peace within my heart. I was so at peace with God that I thought that I had grieved him. Because it felt as if I no longer cared. I was at such peace between me and my Maker. But for days, this baptism of love swept o'er and o'er and o'er him. Spirit, soul, and body, he was in the kingdom of God. Are you wishing to go that little bit deeper? Then keep seeking. Keep seeking. If you understand it already and say, Martin, I'd like to get saved now, you can seek. You can be born again now. Yes. But if there's wrestlings within, keep seeking. And when you seek, you will find that he'll bring you to Calvary. Yeah. He'll bring you to the cross of Jesus. And there at the cross, you will find the love of God bringing you in. God, who is rich in mercy, and with his great love wherewith he has loved us. What a wonder this is. beneath the cross of Jesus, I fain would take my stand. You could be born again, you know, and contact that world that is all around you, but you don't know of it yet. You'll feel it, you can contact it, and you'll see it. You'll become a member of it, that world that is to come. May God grant grace for us to have that in our days.